Billy, what did you bring?
Helps if I unmute.
It does.
I brought one of a text, a biblical text that just means a lot to me in my grounding and in my vocation as a pastor. It's Matthew chapter 5, verse 6.
Okay, so we're going to talk about what that text actually says and what it means to you in just a moment. But I want to hear and see what Charlotte brought.
I brought a song that plays in my head for almost all the time. It is a Brooke Benton song that says, "Oh Lord, why Lord?"
A Brooke Benton song. I've not heard of that person, but maybe if Charlotte's up for it, maybe we'll actually hear a few bars. I've been trying to prime her to sing it, but you don't have to decide right now, Charlotte. Maybe it'll just bubble out of you. Oh, first of all, thank you both so much for saying yes to being a part of this program. Not Quite Strangers is a podcast that you guys have all tuned into. My name is Valerie Hope and I'm your host. And this is an opportunity that I have to introduce two people who are not quite strangers. I happen to know both of them, but they don't know each other. And the hopes is that we build connection, inspire curiosity, and in our own way, shape, or form, challenge status quo. So bringing these two individuals together today is such a treat. I've known Billy for about 3 years or so. His wife, Janet Morrison Lane, has been on the Not Quite Strangers podcast before, so you may have seen her in a previous episode. And also, Billy has been a part of my previous podcast, Time to Come Alive. So, Billy, you're no stranger to podcast world or Valerie land, as I like to call it.
Valerie land, I like that. Valerie land, that's right.
Yeah, you've had some experiences there.
That's right.
And Charlotte, I've known you for about 6-7 months now because you are in the process of getting your certification as an executive coach through the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute. And you're one of my coaching clients. So we've had opportunities to chat quite a bit over the last few months about your career. Now, the unique thing is that both of you are in different parts of the world right now. Billy, would you like to share with us? Tell them where you're from or where you are.
I am in Dallas, Texas, and this is my home. I'm a native, born and raised here in Dallas, Texas.
Oh, for some reason, I thought you were in Missouri. Oh, you were from
that's
Missouri.
That's my wife.
Okay, but you met in Dallas. That's what it is.
Met in Dallas.
Got it. Thanks, Billy. And Charlotte?
I'm currently in Durban, South Africa, on the east coast of South Africa. I'm from Johannesburg.
Right on. So I'm so glad that both of you said yes. And before we get into what you brought, I'm curious, why did you say yes? Because I don't take it for granted that this is an experiment. You don't know each other. You barely saw each other the last, 20 minutes or so before we started recording. So what had you say yes to this invitation?
I said yes because I trust you and I believe in your work and I believe in what you do. And also I'm curious, what is this about and what impact will it have?
Well, thank you for the trust. I appreciate that. And the curiosity. That's going to come in handy. Billy, what about for you?
I tend not to say no to Valerie. Kind of common sense.
I should be asking for a lot more.
No, I mean, you know how much I admire what you do and the passion with which you do it and the expertise, the professionalism, all that. And so anytime I have the chance to be a student, as I at the Valerie School, I try to do that.
Valerie Land.
Valerie Land, that's it. Valerie Land, that's it.
Hopeland actually has a better ring.
Hopeland, that can catch on.
Hopeland is a thing.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, I'm so grateful, Billy, that you feel compelled to say yes. And I think that's really less, or maybe is as much about your generosity of spirit and just being open to new experiences, although sometimes it could be challenging. I know you tend to be kind of a reserved guy in many cases. And so I don't take for granted that you said yes and trusted me like Charlotte is too in having this conversation. what I thought was really fascinating about introducing the two of you is because although you're in different parts of the world and you have very unique perspectives on living and life, right? You're both super committed to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your own ways, right? So Billy, you as a pastor in your church community is something I know you and I have talked a little bit about what you're hoping to create there. And then Charlotte, in your organization and also beyond, right? In ways that you can impact and influence the conversations around diversity and equity and inclusion. And I thought, oh, this would be a really cool conversation to have with someone that's African-American, someone that's South African, and see where it goes. I have no clue. So let's start with your object or the what you brought to the show. We'll start with you, Billy. You mentioned a Bible verse. So tell us, what does it say and what is it about it that makes it so impactful for you?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the Bible verse is the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 6, and it simply says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. And so that is I call it very much a grounding text for me in my vocation as a pastor, because I'm an activist pastor, meaning that I am my theology is very much connected to liberation, to human rights, to social justice, to racial equity, and so forth. And that text reminds me that just the importance of to pay attention to my practice, because it is the hunger and thirst for equality and equity and human rights that drives it. And my hunger can always be co-opted, curtailed, and so I want to continue to sharpen my appetite, because particularly as I don't want my personal experience to be the measure of what equity is. Particularly being a man in a world that's very much patriarchal, I can easily overlook issues of fairness and equity that women face that may be somewhat invisible to me. And so it's important that I keep my appetite expanding and sharp, so that I don't just become kind of satisfied with, okay, yeah, I'm in a good space, but that may not be for my sister. So
wow,
that's what it reminds me.
Well, on behalf of all women, no, I can't speak on behalf of all. I dare not. So no, but I get that. The maintaining the appetite is staying curious, staying open. It sounds like you really challenge yourself to not make assumptions and to, like in your own way, shape, or form, challenge the status quo, which is what we talked about in this particular podcast. Tell us the Bible verse again.
That was Matthew chapter 5, verse 6.
Verse 6. Okay, got it. So we'll make a note of that in the show notes as well, so people have it as a reference if they want to go back to it. Thank you, Billy. Charlotte, what about this song? Tell us about that.
When we were growing up, we in South Africa before 1994, we connected a lot with the soul music that came out of the United States of America. So Motown and that kind of music was really inspiring to us. Rhythm and blues and all of the songs that came out of that whole movement of phenomena that was going on out there. They used to inspire us and keep us inspired and hopeful that the world will eventually change. That's pre-1994. So I knew this song in my childhood. It's an American artist called Brooke Benton. We grew up in a world of song. I think by the time of 7, I was understanding the Messiah, I was understanding Mahalia Jackson, and understood all of those songs because my dad used to whistle through the house. And you would really, really understand all these hymns that my dad sang. Whistling, we needed to learn them. So this is one of the songs that he used to whistle. And when we learned the lyrics were so powerful, and I'm going to read the first stanza. It says, I've searched the open skies to find the reason why. Oh Lord, why Lord? The color of my skin is said to be an awful sin. Oh Lord, why Lord? And it goes on in the second stanza. It says, I got to live and give so much more than I can give. Oh Lord, why Lord? We're singing about race because it was about the color of the skin. But when you look at all of the other impacts on society, anybody that feels exclusion or injustice can ask the same question. Why should my difference be so painful and have such negative impact on me? So this song inspires me to look at those that have or are in a space of exclusion, of injustice, and whether it's in the workplace, it's in the family, or it's in my social arena, and access ways in which in my sphere of influence, I can make it better. And this song has inspired me to always look out of those people that are seeing it without saying it. Why should my difference be so painful and bring so much exclusion for me? And that's why it's such a deep, powerful song for me. And of course, it reminds me of my dad whistling it around the house.
Tell us the name of the song again.
And it's by Brooke Benton, Benton, Oh Lord, why Lord?
Oh Lord, why Lord?
Spotify or anyway, it's a beautiful song. And the other thing that's powerful about the song is the way he sings it, because it has melancholy, but it has hope in it. It's one of those ones where it reminds me of your pain, but it gets you into dreaming about how better it can be.
To transcend the pain. Got it.
That's good. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. So I'll also make sure I add the note of the song name as well as the artist. Would you like to whistle a few bars?
No, I cannot sing.
No, sing it. Whistle.
No, that's even worse.
No?
Nobody's gonna understand what happened.
I try to.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, I like the way that he sings, Lord, in this world you made so secret. You know, it's just the way he is having this dialogue with God that says, why are you allowing this?
Yeah.
And you see that's injustice, whether it's what happened in the US recently over time and over, what's happening in my country over and over, what's happening in Turkey, what's happening anywhere in the world, Myanmar. The question is the same. Why?
Yeah. And that's maybe a good question to ask now. And thank you for singing that. I don't take that for granted either.
Oh, you call that singing. That's great.
That was singing.
I'll take it. I'll take it. So let's go back to this question why, and not so much why all the suffering that's happening in the world, right, where people feel excluded, but why is it such an important topic or time for the two of you? Like, what is it that makes this particular commitment that you have so important?
I'll go for it. And also it's about something that I learned from one of the first victims of the apartheid regime. His name is Nkobutse Tiro. On the occasion of a graduation in 1974 in what was then a Blacks-only universities, he said, what good is an education of an African child if it doesn't come to the aid of Africa in the time of Africans' most need? So I came from a place of disadvantage given the fact that I grew up under apartheid regime, and I crossed into the democratic regime, and I ended up in a place of privilege. And the question I asked myself is that, therefore, what's the point of having this privilege if it serves no one? What's the point of having rank and power in my job and it serves no one? What's the point of having this education that I have when it serves no one? And that's the question Nkobutse Tiro asked all of us in 1974. And when I do my work, I always ask myself, what's going to be different when I'm done? And what dial must I move for who? And who's going to benefit in it? And do it in a way that actually teaches inclusion, teaches the fact that everybody has to be in. And that's what inspires me about make a difference in your spheres of influence and find a way of moving the dial towards the positive for everyone. Because that's the reason why you are in a place of privilege, in a place of power,
Mhm.
in a place of leadership, and you're in a space where you can influence and you can change the world, your own little world.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny you say this, Charlotte, because not funny, haha, but funny as in it really strikes a chord with me. And Billy, you and I may have talked about this before with Janet, but I, over the last year, especially during everything that's happened here in the US and the voices that are rising now to address these challenges of diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially in the workplace, right? And overall in society, but especially in the workplace, several people reached out to me to see, hey, do you teach implicit bias? Do you teach, all these different courses that would bring to light or support some of the initiatives that these organizations had? And I always found myself going like, no, that's not my thing. Here's some other source or resource or person that you might want to reach out to. But I also felt this, to your point, what's the purpose of this education and privilege if it's not here to serve? And I really had to think, well, what is my education? What is my privilege exactly? And what came up for me was I have the privilege of being able to connect with, I would say, just about anybody. I feel really comfortable walking into a lot of different spaces. I'm an immigrant in this country. I will talk about this later, but I didn't know I was Black until I was 14 years old. Meaning, yes, I knew my skin color, but I didn't know that it had a significance, social significance, until I was 14. And so that level of freedom, if you will, the trauma that I think in many cases the skin color has had in the history of the United States and in other parts of the world, I didn't have. And that actually had me shy away from like, it's not really my fight, or I don't really know if I can contribute in any way that would dishonor or disrespect the trauma that individuals are experiencing it. But what was interesting and what started to come up after all of these different requests, and I got some coaching around it, coaches need coaches sometimes to see, I realized, to your point, my education and privilege actually allows me to see a perspective that maybe doesn't get shared very often, or perhaps bring people together. And this podcast is an actual direct solution, if you will, or response to what I felt I could bring to the space. Literally had someone that shared, she wanted to have more diverse community for her child to grow up in. This is a woman who's of Jewish descent, white, living in a metropolitan city. And she's actually been a guest on the show. So you have to subscribe to the channel if you want to hear that interview. www.notquitestrangers.com. But she actually, just by saying that she wanted to have a more diverse community. And I was like, how is that difficult? Like, if you live in a metropolitan city, that should be pretty easy. But then I was like, no, somehow it's maybe simpler for me. And, the fact that I can just pick up the phone and go, Charlotte and Billy, or, my friend Samuel in Hong Kong, or my friend Mehmet in Turkey, like I have people all over the world that I connect with. I thought, oh, there's an opportunity that I can usher people into a space to have a meaningful conversation. I can facilitate that as a coach. I have the skill to, but then I also have the circle of influence, Charlotte, that you mentioned, to bring people that are different together to do just that. And that's how I'm now choosing and finding ways to use this power and privilege, right? This education power and privilege in this space, which is why it makes me so excited to have, individuals like you are up to doing something important, say, yes, I'll come and have this conversation in public with a stranger because I trust you. So that is really powerful distinction that you made, Charlotte, about power, privilege, and education being the leverage, right? Being the leverage. I said a lot there, but Billy, take it away. What is it that makes this commitment, to being an activist pastor? What makes that so compelling for you?
So for me, it really has to do with my understanding of God. And this has not always been the case. I grew up in a very conservative church, very loving church environment and family, but very conservative. And when I say that, what I mean is this kind of separation between, church is this, everything else is over there. And so, but in my adult years, then things began to integrate, if you will, in the realm of my faith, in my theology, and this discovery of who God is. God is a God of liberation, and which means all human beings have a right to freedom, and that is as I studied the scripture, on God's part, a very radical commitment. And so if I am to take God seriously, then I accepted the idea that I must be just as committed. Doesn't mean I'm going to get it right. It's a journey, but I must be just committed to the freedom of every individual, and be and recognize the structures that we and institutions that we as human beings develop just because we're civilized, but how those structures can be oppressive, how those structures can be structures that do not honor the freedom of individuals, and make distinctions based on individuals' color or gender or what have you. And so all that to say, for me, it's a matter of faith and understanding who God is, and that liberation is what I'm committed to. And so when you use the term, diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm definitely with that. I kind of put it under the umbrella of liberation, and the Bible and the text speak powerfully of that. And Charlotte mentioned the civil rights movement. That's what Dr. King and many of the other civil rights leaders understood. They were men of faith, and they understood this radical commitment that God had to the freedom of all individuals. And so that's where it comes from for me.
Liberation. Yeah. Charlotte, what were you going to say?
I was saying that's amazing. That's powerful.
It is. I'm going to start calling this liberation. Conversations for liberation.
I love it. I love it.
Maybe a third podcast in the making. So I have a question for you guys, and this is something that I've been kind of playing with, this idea, and I alluded to it earlier, that I didn't realize I was Black and it mattered until I was 14. And we're immigrants to the US, lived in military bases when we moved to the United States, and so all fairly diverse places. And color wasn't a thing. Like, my first crush was in a Japanese guy. I didn't even think that was anything wrong with that. I didn't think there was anything different about it, let's just say. He didn't know I had a crush on him, but that's because I was a teenager and I didn't know better. But when I was 14 and we moved to a small community in Southeast Alabama, and I walked into the cafeteria my first day of school, and all the Black students were sitting on one side and the white students on another, although there were no Jim Crow law signs or expectations, socially, their parents had grown up and lived in segregated society for all of their lives, most of their lives, and then their grandparents, etc. So it was social. And I just realized at that moment, I'm like, oh, I have to sit here because I'm Black? That doesn't feel right to me. And I didn't know what to do with myself. So I became kind of an introvert for the first 2 years of high school, really just wanting to avoid all those types of social dynamics. And I found my way in other ways, but I'm curious about the two of you. When was the first time you realized that you were Black and it mattered in some way, shape, or form?
So it's funny because I answered this question a few weeks ago in a different form. And it was really good for me to think about it. So I go back to 1977. I was in elementary school, and a TV series came out based on Alex Haley's book called Roots. And it was on primetime television. Me and my family tuned in every night to watch it. And so I remember going to school one day during that series, and somehow, before school, we'd always play football, be doing something. Me and boys, and we'd be out in front of the school playing football, doing something. And I remember I was kind of over to the side and just having a conversation with group of kids, Black and white. We just standing there having a conversation. And somebody, I don't even know who, brought up brought up Roots. You know, did y'all see Roots last night? And you're like, yeah. And a white student said, yeah, man, the coolest part, you know, is when they were whipping them niggers. And that's exactly what he said. That is exactly what he said. He said it was really cool. And at that point, it got kind of quiet. And I didn't know what to say. I just knew, okay, I didn't really think that was cool. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to process. What I knew, though, was at that point is that he and I had different roles. Because if that's who you identifying with, you know, you're not identifying with what I'm identifying with. And I knew at that point, there was just these different roles. And really what began to happen, because our family, we lived in a neighborhood that I guess that had been the victim of white flight, if you will, because at one time it was predominantly white, and then, you know, whites moved further north. When that happened, when he said that, it really began to put into context for me some of the things I was seeing in our neighborhood that I, you know, just didn't make any sense to me before. But things like, you know, when the white neighbors who were left somewhat looked at us with suspicion, almost as if we did not belong there. It just began to put some of these things into context. And so at that point, I realized, okay, we on two different sides. And you know, it would be years later till I really figure out what to really make of that. But at that point, I recognized my Blackness.
Wow, elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And do you remember? Have you seen that friend or that young man since then? Did you guys have any interaction after that? What happened to your friendship after that experience?
I may have seen him since then and didn't know it. I mean, we were playground friends. It's like,
Okay.
Not hey, I'm gonna come over your house. It's, you know, we on the basketball court, or, you know, on the football field, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But outside of that, so who knows? I may have run into him. Who knows where he is or what he does or what his mindset is at this point. I don't know. But he was obviously in a household very different from mine.
Yeah. Wow. Every time I ask that question, I never know where it's going to go. And it's so interesting to see that moment, right? And I think we can identify how, wow, what do you say when something like that happens? But you know distinctly, as young as you were, that now we're not on the same side. I think what you said, that we're not on the same side.
Right.
Fascinating. Charlotte, what about for you? Do you have a moment that you recall?
Absolutely, it's actually moments of transitions and recognition of who I am in terms of race, and maybe a sense of who I am in my country. So I think in 1968, my grandparents were victims of forced removals.
I'm sorry, what? Victims of forced removal. Okay, yeah, got it.
The country was being rearranged so that the white people can gain access to very fertile land, and then the Africans, Black people, everybody else can be put in other spaces where they can be grouped together in ethnic arrangements and be put in places where they can just become places where they come and source labor for mines and for whatever economic activity that's going on. But fertile land was now taken away from them. And my grandfather had almost dual economic streams. He had land and he had cattle, livestock, and then he worked in the city as well. So he was relatively, in that particular community, well off, could send his children to boarding school. That was my grandparents. And they lived in a house. For me, it was beautiful, it was big. And when the forced removals happened, my grandfather had been in prison already, 70 that particular year. They took him to prison because he was resisting forced removals. And my grandmother was ill. So my mom had to take me and my baby sister, at that time there were two of us, to go and assist my grandmother. It didn't click on me when we were there and I could see the demolition of our houses and the packing of livestock. It just didn't make sense what was going on. It was like watching a movie of your, your beloved grandmother's house being demolished. And then whatever you could rescue, it's packed into a truck, and you are packed into this truck and you're shipped away. But my grandfather is missing and I'm not sure where he is. It didn't make sense at that particular time until later when I was at school and I was older and I was understanding the arrangement. That was the first one. The second time when I realized that I am a second-class citizen in my own country was in June 1976. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
June 1976. I was born and raised in Soweto. It was at that time the biggest township in South Africa. It is southwestern of Johannesburg. And that was the epicenter of the June 16 uprising. And the school children that were marching were going to walk past our school, which also walk past where I lived with my parents in that township called Pimville. And I was in school. And that day we were asked to leave, so we left. And it's nice because now the school stops at 11 o'clock and you are 11 years old, like, hey, we're going home, we're going to eat and play. And and that was going on in our minds, like, go home, and then we were all dispersed. And then the following, all of that week, from the 16th of June onwards, there was so much violence meted out by white men in army vehicles to anybody they could find in the township who was 100% Black or African like me, because we lived in a 100% Black or 100% African community because we were segregated by race. So that was the first sense of, who am I here? Why me and my people are attacked by those people so violently, guns and tear gases? There was a sense of, I am not an equal here, but when you're 11, you can't interpret it. And then it went on and on. And in 1982, when I finished matric, which is going to varsity, and I applied to go to Wits University, which was at that time, it did accept Africans, colored and Indian people, those kind of people, but they measured how many they wanted. So I had to apply, because I was Black African, I had to apply to some other Black administration authority. And they said, no, not you, because you come from you can go back to that Bantustan, which is that area where people like you live. That was the time when I thought, this is serious. Wow. They demolished my dad's house, my grandfather's house. They took his livestock. They threw him in prison. They killed and attacked everybody in my childhood. They killed my neighbors. Some of my family members are missing. And I'm here, I cannot even go to varsity. And those are some of the ways in which I felt. But where the moment of truth, when it really sunk, that I have felt like a second-class citizen in my own country, was when I voted for the first time on the 27th of April. And I knew it. And I knew it. And I felt for the first time when I had a right to vote, that now I feel I belong here. And this is my country. And this is my continent. Because I had never, until that day when I voted, called myself African. Wow. And I've never, before that, felt like a full citizen of any country. First, I was put in a Bantustan because I speak Setswana in a Bantustan of Setswana-speaking people. And then I came to the township. And then I had a classification called 10-1A or 10-1B because I was born here, but I was raised there. Everybody had a classification. And then there was violence against people that looked like me by people that don't look like me. Then I'm not admitted at varsity simply because I'm half Black. There was layers and layers and layers of exclusion and violence meted just on the basis of the color of my skin.
Wow. Charlotte, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I have chills listening to what you shared. And I get that. Yeah, the layers and I can't imagine, like, what is the conversation happening in your family about everything that's happening, right? From your grandfather losing his home and being arrested, to the violence, to now this opportunity being taken away from school. Like, what did you talk about in your family about that? Like, what was it like at the dinner table or at home as these things were happening in your life?
There were two parts to it. Our parents tried to give us normal lives. So you'd go to school, come back, talk about what's on TV, listen to music, go to church, then Mahalia Jackson songs, go to Sunday school, play in a netball team, and go on a singing, choir competitions, and take annual school trips to the coast. It was very funny normality that our parents were trying to create for us as in that abject poverty we grew up in. So it was a sense of normality. And also when everybody around you is discriminated and just as poor, and you play with them, so you actually don't realize how great this thing is. So that was the one portion. The other portion was the fact that we kept on missing, or people in my family kept on disappearing. I've got a cousin that disappeared. And if you're old enough, they would tell you that he left, but they don't know where he is. Because if you know where you are, where you think you know where they are, or you know where they are, you are going to violently be dealt with by the state. So they come to your house, they ask you, where's your brother? And if you happen to have an inclination that the last time he was here was on the day, it means you know where they are, and they will not stop coming to your house. So we were never told why people disappeared. They went overseas, they went into exile, they went to prison. And that's what it was. I read about one of my cousins in the media, because those conversations were not had, that he was arrested in one of the sieges of, I think, Silverton Siege, it was called. That's when I realized, oh, this guy has, Abud so-and-so, we call them Abud. Abud so-and-so has been missing, only to find that this is where he was.
Newspaper.
He had gone out of the country, came back, and he was involved in some uprising, and then he was arrested, and now he was in court. And obviously, when he's in court, the apartheid government is going to put you in every newspaper because you are such. That's how we got to know. So the conversations around the dinner table were as normal as a family could have, and they were hush-hush around what was going on in our families and community, and the pain in the hearts and minds and souls of our parents. They worked on it, that they don't tell us. But we then learned, when you start being a teenager, you start reading books and you meet other people and you start working, then that whole history comes down on you.
Yeah.
And you start interacting with it. So we had a semi-normal childhood, as normal as possible.
As normal as possible. It sounds like, yeah, but then there's a lot of the adults in your life protected you as best they knew how from some of the painful truth. But yeah, it sounds like, yeah, you notice and you feel it. And I think that's a piece that, I want to come back to in a moment, but like, where does that go? Like, where does that pain, that heartache, that confusion, that, right, anger, all of that go if people aren't really talking about it, but you're just kind of surviving and dealing with, right, trying to make things as normal as possible.
Yeah.
Billy, I want to get your reactions to this, because I see and hear your facial expression and your voice. What would you want to say to them, to this?
Powerful. I'm glad you asked about that trauma and what we do with it, what happens to it. And, as I listen to Charlotte, I think what people of color often do is we carry it in some way. In some cases, if you're a person of faith, unfortunately, sometimes, depending on how that faith, how you practice that, it kind of gets just pushed to the side, and it'll be better by and by, and because that's the only way you can move forward. And so I think, but I think that trauma really doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. And, when I listen to the things that Charlotte has gone through, it shocks me, because I say shock, but it's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. And part of my frustration is when we talk about these things in the United States, sometimes it's well, that's ancient history. Charlotte is talking about stuff that's happened in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. That ain't ancient history. These people are still alive and walking the earth. And that's not to say that they're bad people. It's simply to say that that reality is still alive. It has not gone anywhere. And from my standpoint as a pastor, it is frustrating when I'm talking about, civil. Sometimes I hesitate to even say civil rights movement because people want to throw it back in the black and white days. It's right now. I mean, even here in Dallas. And so, we're removed from some of the atrocities, if you will, that Charlotte has experienced. Although we do have our share here in Dallas. Don't get me wrong. The house bombings and people being lynched, and that stuff has happened right here in this city. But even in my lifetime, police brutality. And in fact, you may have been keeping up with the news. We just renamed the street after Botham John, young man who lost his life because of police brutality. And it gets somewhat shrouded in this, well, it's law enforcement doing their job. And the data just don't prove that out. The data just does not prove that out when it comes to the proportion of people of color who are murdered by police. It's not just law enforcement doing their job. There's something else going on. And it's not to say that all law enforcement is bad. I need to make that clear. But we have that. And the other thing I think about, we particularly as we talk about Charlotte said layers of exclusion. It's so very true. So here in the a metropolis like Dallas, you have quote unquote diversity. So for example, you have some schools that are very much diverse in terms of student body. What you have along with that, however, is you have a very anemic representation of people of color in decision-making positions. And so you have a school district where, yes, there are Blacks and Latinos and Asian Americans and what have you. But then when you look at the leadership, there is an over-representation of people who are white. So you can have a school district that is, over 70%, 75% people of color, but the leadership is less than 12%. That is not diversity and inclusion. That's not what it is. And so I think people who talk about, yes, I want my child to be in a more diverse environment. Make sure that diverse environment includes people who are in leadership, as well as people, who are peers. So those are just some of the thoughts that come to my mind as I hear Charlotte talk.
Oof. So making sure that the system is actually set up, right? It's sustainable. Mm-hmm. It's sustainable that way when you talk about implementing that at the level of leadership. And I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier in regards to this lived experience and the conversations about it. I think one of the things that I'm clear on is that, this is just hitting the surface, if that. I know we probably could talk for like 10 hours about all these things and still only scratch the surface. There was a quote I saw recently. I actually just saw it this week. And it was from this gentleman. His name is Dr. Gabor Mate. And he says, trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is a wound that you sustained, and wounds can be healed. And the reason I got that is because it brings to mind that all of these very painful experiences, if they're not healed somehow, it can sometimes make us ineffective in actually making some of the changes that we want to see, or making some of making the progress that we're committed to making. So I'm curious about the two of you. How are you handling the wounds, or what have you seen in your environment to address those wounds? Why are you laughing, Billy?
Not laughing because it's fun. I mean, they're all wounds, right? Yeah. And I know for me, therapy is a part of my life. I have a therapist because yes, there's not always the space where you can talk about these things. And you know, even for me, even though my wife and children are very supportive, but you don't always feel like you can, you know, dump these things on them because they carry them, right? So that's not always fair. And so that kind of, you know, mental health, emotional health therapy is a part of my life. And unfortunately, however, I don't think it's nearly available enough to us as people of color, not even close. Especially if you don't have means in some cases to pay for that. Sometimes that's the only time you can get it, because a lot of times those who do it at very reduced or pro bono rates, as good as they are, they're overwhelmed because it's not enough of them. It's not nearly enough of them. And so, you know, in short, your question, yeah, I think you have to have a space where there is, you know, emotional therapy and you know, to talk these things out.
Process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Charlotte?
The trauma lives, and also for us is that you can have individual trauma, but when you have communal trauma like we do, families and societies, then the outlets are limited because the very person you're going to talk to also needs to talk to you. Yeah. So one of the most important things is that you find systems that hold all of you together, and then you understand where you are at, and so your level of alertness and self-awareness has to be heightened in a sense of which of me is acting here and which of me is responding, which part of me is dealing with this matter right now. For instance, I'm extremely sensitive to exclusion, and I'm extremely sensitive to disrespect because it's subconscious, and I try to be alert about how I'm going to respond to it because that was a traumatic experience. It's not the fact that you refused me to play, you know, there were 6 of you, I wanted to be the 7th and you refused. It was systematic, meted out by an unjust system. And it was in all layers of my life and in all aspects of my life. So exclusion for me, it's an extremely sensitive thing. And also the sense of not being allowed to. So when you take up a leadership position like me, and in the team that you're in, you have a diverse team, and then you are building a diverse organization, you've got to be alert who of you stepping into a leadership position so that you do not inadvertently exclude others based on the pain of your life. Because I can get in there and see myself as that traumatized, you know, toddler, 5-year-old, 3-year-old, or that traumatized 11-year-old, or the traumatized, you know, 16-year-old when I finished matric, or whichever layers and layers of exclusion. I can do that. So I need to be alert, and I need to be aware, and I need to then use systems that I have to manage my own individual and communal trauma that we went through, and not let it play out. And one of the things that's powerful about this song is that it was, you know, I knew it from, I think, the 70s, if not early 80s. But this song is still what is so painful about life and society is still up to today.
Yeah.
You can sing that song as if it was written yesterday.
That's right.
You know, I remember when we were watching a news out of the news in America, what was going on in America. It was one of the songs I had to play in my car because I didn't know how to ask God. Why? Who are you going to ask? So the other thing is, as you believe, is that I rely on therapy, and I needed to access multiple different types of therapy. You know, it is about pastoral care in church. I'm a Christian. It is about learning the Buddhist way of life, about how you deal with life and things you can't control, and how you interpret your pain and deal with it. It's just finding skills. So there are multiple ways of dealing with it. Is acknowledge your pain, understand it, be alert, be conscious of it, find systems that work for you. and also have a very high sense of self-awareness to know when it can blind you. It becomes your terrible blind spot because you can overreact. I can overreact. If a white man comes and steps in front of me, I can overreact, or I can be a better me. So it's that alertness of which you are you going to meet out now.
Right.
Oof.
Yeah.
Because my anger around injustice is very, very close. My antennas are up and they're very sharp.
Yeah.
But my responses cannot be the same responses that were meeting against me.
Yeah.
And I so identify with that, Charlotte, just because I think, again, coming from the practice and the vocation of faith, that our responsibility, at least my responsibility, I'll speak for me, is it is to have that alertness, as you talked about, and then somehow find it within myself to have the grace to educate, not to overlook, but to educate, because that individual or that group will continue their exclusionary practices, sometimes in ignorance, because they simply do not see. And so that when that happens to me, I do have a responsibility to do my best to educate. Absolutely.
Let me share a little story that happened at work. So we are having a system that in the redressing of the injustices of the past, we have race-based decisions sometimes in South Africa. So we do report on race and gender and age and ethnicity and all of that. It's a legislation in the country, you report to it. Then we put a system in place to try to address only Black portion of our employees. So I have one of our employees that said, this is not fair and this is not right. And I actually created a platform for those employees that felt it was not right, all right, to come and see me. I mean, I'm in the top 8 in the organization of 32,000 people. So I have rank and power and privilege. And for me to make myself accessible was the first step of breaking that line of saying, even when I'm in power, I'm available. And the second one was the fact that you can imagine this is a white male and I'm an African woman. So we are if it was in the past, we'd have been in very different spaces. Now I'm in a position of power and there are employees in the sections of the organization that are in the operational levels. So he comes and have a conversation with me. He talks, and I'm borrowing you, Billy, on the story of educate. He goes around how bad we are as African people. We are banning schools, we don't understand, and this is not fair, and so on and so on. I took that opportunity to first share with them my history and what it meant for me to be excluded. And why this law is a just law. It's not a fair law, but it's a just law. And why it has to happen. And it hurt individuals then, and this one is going to hurt individuals like him as well. And he wrote me an email after that. He said, I've worked in this organization for a very long time. It's more than 20 years I've worked here. It's the first time I'm speaking to a top manager in the company. The second thing is that I appreciate your past and I understand why you have to do what you're doing. And thank you for taking the time to educate me, use that word, in explaining why things are happening, why this law has been passed, and what happened to people like you. And he said to me, I never knew. I said, of course, the system made sure you don't know.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
So the alertness is that use what you have, power, privilege, and education, to extend a better kind of humanity.
That's right. Spot on. Amen. Yep.
Wow.
Thank you.
I want to go down this this path because there's so much I want to know. Talk about inspiring curiosity. But a few things, just kind of play back a few of the things that really stood out to me. I think one is that both of you are proponents of really doing the work, right? Whatever inner work needs to be done, because you're both here to serve, right? Your commitment is so clear to not only yourselves, your families, and your communities, but really to educate and serve other people. And in order for us to do that, and Charlotte, you said that, it can't be based on the pain of our lives. You know, it's hard to heal the sick when you're sick. And so finding healing, finding support, finding whatever it is that we need in order to be able to provide something, to be of service, to be at the highest level of service and most effective level of service. Sounds like that's a big cornerstone of what the two of you have been doing. And then the other piece that I hear also is that you both keep your, I don't want to use this word to diminish, but there's an edge, like there's an intentionality. There is a focus and a passion behind what you do, not as a reaction to the pain that you're experiencing and dealing with, but as a response to something needs to be done. And I'm going to take responsibility for making sure that I do something, right? You get what I'm saying? So there's that, I call it an edge because there's this very insightful, purposeful conversation that you're having in either your place of work or in your church community, but that you both have taken on the role of being the person, like I'm the one that's here in this community, in this moment, in this embodiment to make something happen. So those are the two things that I'm really impressed and awed and admire about the two of you and where you are in your life and your path right now. So I hope this conversation doesn't end here. I feel a part 2 coming on. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'll just drop a seed. I see a part 2. But as we're coming to the end of our time together, I'm just going to invite us to zoom out just a bit and hear, what are your reactions from the very first time you met an hour plus ago to now, having a conversation like the one we've just had?
Wow. I think I have been so enriched by the experiences and the stories and the life of Billy Lane and just the passion with which he does his work. Mm-hmm. First of all, I need to say I have extreme sense of respect for people that do the work that you do. Utmost respect, because it's an unending work. Yeah. And I don't know how you do it, and you do it where you are not expecting reward, and also the outcomes are not measurable in today's, in terms of today's life of measuring. Yeah. So it's a sense of higher purpose that I really respect. And for me to have this privilege of listening to you and your personal stories, I mean, does a story of Roots. I still refuse to watch it, and I haven't watched it. I'm one of the people that will never watch Roots.
I don't blame you.
Yep, I won't. So, and just knowing that it hurt and you were able to lift yourself above it, it's just remarkable. It's just the story of a life that you live every day. And when the other thing that I took away is when you say, it's today, now, in my community that I see the injustices. Because, you know, when you are far from other people, you always feel that and think that they're in a better space until you see what you see on national television. Yeah. But when you hear a friend of Valerie that says, it's here and now in my community and I'm going to do something about it, it really is an amazing experience listening to your story. And thanks for being so vulnerable and bring it out. It's an enriched story, and thank you for the work that you do. I'll remember your story.
Well, I think I'm going to say that Valerie owes me, because you put me on a show with a show enough heavyweight soldier like Charlotte. I shouldn't even be on camera. I need to be like Ford and Louie and just be off camera listening to Charlotte, because what, you know, you're not only is your story profound, your vocation and the professionalism, how you handle it at such a high level is just, I mean, it's inspiring. I mean, I'm like, man, can you come to Dallas? Can you please just come to, I mean, we got some good folk in here in Dallas. Don't get me wrong, but it's just, I'm deeply inspired. That really is for me a model from me. The way that I did not realize you were in such a big organization, and the weight of your responsibility and the grace and accuracy with which you handle situations like that, because that's hard. I mean, I know that is hard. And let's not overlook the fact that you are a woman. And it doesn't matter where on this planet you are or what color. If you are a woman, that so enough said about that. And so, yeah, just great deal of respect and inspiration for your work, and definitely. You're probably not gonna get rid of me. I'm gonna get your email, because I definitely want to keep up and follow up, because I know there's a lot that I need to continue to learn from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. What an honor. Thank you so much.
Oh, the honor has been mine to observe this. And yes, the connection.
You still owe me, though.
We'll figure that one out. We'll talk about that, Billy. Don't worry. We'll figure that one out. So I'm curious, what didn't we talk about that you would like to continue talking about? Not that we'd have time right now, but if you just could give us some headlines, like what are some things that you can now hear and see, oh, I have this question, or I'd love to touch this topic. Like, what would you continue to have conversations on?
And that's exactly what just crossed my mind. It's almost like when people are saying, I have reached this level and this, and I want to say, I still suffer microaggressions at work and in my life and in my workspace. And right now I run seminars for professional women at work, just to say to them, it's going to happen, and what are you going to do about it? And in these seminars, and the one gentleman calls it for women, I call it for families, because it is important that workplaces appreciate families. But when you look at, and when you raised it that and said, I'm a woman at work, it really still is about that, is that the spaces are not inclusive. And you still have a sense, even at my level, where you say something and another man has to say it, and then they hear it. And in some instances, I have the courage to speak out in that meeting, but most of the time I do private education. I never let anything go away, even when one of the people I worked with in one organization started talking very ugly about my country. That person was an expert. I had a very private education with them. I spoke for a whole 35 minutes, telling them the history of my country. And when I parted with them, and they said, thank you very much. So I still suffer microaggressions as an African woman, and the journey is long and hard, and I'm only a few. So we still have to talk about how do we get up and lift and continue doing the lift. And it's heavy work, and we have to keep going. So one of the things we need to talk about is that, what is our role in leadership to lift others up? The ones that have been through what we have been going through. And as Billy was saying, it's here and now. I mean, the stories I was telling about 1968 and 1976, these are the stories that are happening now.
Yeah.
This is the violence that's meted out by a state against people who happen to look a certain way. So the work is not finished. So the dialogue is about, how do we lift others out? What's the work that needs to get done? And I'd really like that conversation to be had with the people that are struggling with it, with the people that have gone through it. Billy and I have seen it. I don't think we're in the promised land yet, but we are at least on the mountaintop, and we can see the lay of the land, and people are in the land. So I'd love that conversation. Valerie, in Hopeville, you can create a platform for others to have that dialogue about, I'm going through what you went through. What should I be doing?
Thank you, Charlotte.
And I echo that. I would love, I'm a human rights, civil rights, history type of person, just because I feel it's important to understand how these things evolve, because they don't just stay history, they continue to evolve. And so, I have probably a ton of questions for Charlotte about, Nelson Mandela and the experience in Johannesburg. I mean, I want to hear that. I've read about it, but I've never met anyone who you were like there. And so, I would love that. And by the way, Charlotte, one thing I've stopped doing, I've stopped calling them microaggressions. They're named micro, they're aggressions, period.
They're aggressions. Thank you.
Period.
Nothing micro. Nothing micro. And on another note, what was it like? Because both of you shared very vulnerable, very, very transparent about your experiences. What is it like to share that with a virtual stranger or not quite stranger?
Well, yeah, I think you just hit it. I mean, after listening to Charlotte, yeah, I don't feel no strangeness, not at all. I
Mm,
mean, I think that there's a solidarity there
Absolutely.
that I definitely sense, and so yeah,
Yeah.
that's no problem.
Not at all. I didn't feel I was talking to someone I don't know. And I think it's easy to get connected with people that share the same purpose in life. And you know, I don't know what you called it, an urge and an intentionality about doing good to society and to be doing good and being good in organizations where we are at. And you know, so that's one of the things that are so powerful about how listening to Billy Lane, you know, and having this dialogue. I didn't feel for a you know, a fraction of the time that there wasn't something I could say. I was talking to somebody who appreciates my history and who I am, and I appreciate Billy's history and who he is. What it is about.
And I appreciate the two of you so incredibly much. It's the conversation exceeded, I don't know if it's exceeded my expectations, but it definitely has moved and given me the resolve that these are the kind of conversations that make a difference. Nothing else to connect people. I think for me, the thing that I haven't quite nailed it yet, but I'm clear that systems are run by people, right? And if people's hearts don't change, systems can't inherently change. The people who are managing the systems are the ones that at play. So Charlotte, your demonstration of that with that young man that you said you wanted to, or that gentleman that wanted to that you educated, right, on the history, or you educated on the fairness. Like there are these moments where the individual takes a responsibility for making a difference, making a change, sharing, exposing something that could shift someone's perspective. And that's really the purpose and the what's driving these types of connections for me, is like, how do I bring people together that could in their own way, shape, or form challenge the status quo? It doesn't always look like something big, but even a shift in perspective, a shift in how we listen, a shift in our, how we connect with somebody could hopefully at the end of this conversation go make a difference someplace else. I'm so grateful the two of you were willing to say yes to this experiment, and that there's more conversation to come as a result of it. And who knows, even greater shifts, perhaps there's even a greater purpose for the two of you meeting and connecting today that we'll never know. And, for those of you who have been listening and watching this conversation, I'll be sure to include their contact information. So if you would like to get into conversation with either of them about anything that they said, or like to share your experience and your comments about their experiences, please do so. Go to www.notquitestrangers.com so that you can subscribe and not miss a single episode, including this one, in your inbox. Or you can go to the YouTube channel for Connect to Joy and also subscribe to get notifications there. Charlotte and Billy, I can't say it enough. Thank you for your time. Thank you for what you shared and your transparency, and looking forward to even more conversations.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for having us. It's been
Thank you.
An honor.
It's been a treat. All right, everybody, have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.